Okay, Ron Stoker here, coming from you live from the Battleborn Ducker Studio. Another wonderful WHIN Podcast, Wildlife and Habitat Improvement in Nevada. We have got a one of a kind, first time ever done. We're going international here. Two countries, two guys that are going to blow your mind with what you're doing. We have Chris and Alejandro. Chris is from Australia. They're recording live from Australia. Alejandro's from Mexico, and we got the great and powerful Dr. Wasden here in the studios.
Good to
Jason,
see everybody.
Jason, why don't you tell us a little bit why you drug the world together in a small room for a WHIN podcast?
Well, I'm an interesting person. I like policy and I like agriculture, and so I'm interested in regenerative agriculture, policy entrepreneurs, permaculture, and now rehydration. And both Alejandro and Chris are doing very unique things in their respective areas as far as using donkeys to rehydrate land for various purposes. And so Chris is in Australia and Alejandro is in Mexico. And I let them say hello to the group here.
Yeah, Chris, Alejandro, why don't you give a quick introduction and a little bit about yourselves and what got you down this path and journey. We can start out with your origin story of sort, if you're okay with that, Jason.
Yeah.
Yeah, hello. My name is Alejandro Carrillo. I'm a cattle rancher in Chihuahua, Mexico. Chihuahua actually borders Texas and New Mexico. And it's been almost 20 years that I joined the ranch. Pretty arid area. And obviously, we started working with cattle, and then we were trying to emulate nature, mimic nature. And I thought at some point, like, okay, we're trying to emulate nature, but nature doesn't have just one animal to try to nurture or to regenerate the land, and that's where the donkeys came into play. So now we have a herd of cattle and donkeys, a few horses, all working towards improving the land.
What
Um,
made you get started? Oh, go ahead. Sorry, Chris, and then I'll go back to Alejandro with the questions.
and I'm Chris Engler, new Australian, born in southern Africa, raised there, came to Australia, didn't have much money, so I was looking for a property, and I found a place that was not viable, but we had sunshine, we had rain dropping out of the sky every year, we had eroding soils, we had the basic ingredients to build soil and build productivity. So I suspected we could, by working with nature, rebuild the productivity that might have been here thousands of years ago. And I started working with the animals that were on site, that were formerly feral cattle and formerly feral donkeys. We changed their behavior to work in to behave in line with how their wild ancestors would have behaved in their homelands, as the nature's gardeners, mulching, evenly fertilizing and pruning vegetation and building soil. And I embarked on that journey in '92, and I'm still learning.
That's great. So I know, Alejandro, you do a tequila farm, correct? You raise the blue agave, and you have incorporated domestic donkeys, correct, into your farm?
Yeah, that's right. Well, the the agave project was more in central Mexico, where we use multiple species, uh, because they were concerned about the people actually not actually boycotting tequila because of the land degradation that is going on in Mexico. So we help them with just livestock to regenerate the place, and they now came out with the first regen tequila in the world. That was pretty successful story. Um, in my place, we actually incorporated donkeys because we got the belief that cattle. I mean, a lot. I do a lot of work in the western U.S. and obviously northern Mexico, and I think what's going on with our grasses there is that they are dying. We're desertifying very large areas, not because of overgrazing anymore, but because of the lack of animal impact. So if you were to ask me what you would have done like 20 years ago in your ranch, probably would have sold all my cattle and buy a bunch of donkeys. Because yeah, because the donkeys can actually, I tell people, can live probably eating just paper, but But I mean, they're just great, 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 incredible tools that instead of degrading large tracts of land, for example, in public land, we can put them to work. So they're a great combination with the cows. I call my donkeys my cover crop or my service crop, because a lot of farmers are like, well, I just want to see monoculture of corn because the other plants are going to take water and things like that. Well, some ranchers are concerned about us having donkeys because they say, why don't you have a cow, one more cow instead of one more donkey? But donkeys are actually adding to the equation. They're actually helping us to a more even grazing. So they will take the low quality stuff and then convert it into manure and urine and hoof action and so on.
That's amazing, and I know that Chris, you're doing wild donkey management, which is a little bit different than the domestic donkeys. What behaviors have you been able to influence, and how have you been able to influence the behaviors of those donkeys to help you put more water on your land?
So, yes, the donkeys are now wild. Before they were feral, which meant, in my understanding, they were just domesticated donkeys let loose and then selectively grazing, and the land was definitely going backwards. And we suspected the problem wasn't the donkeys or too many animals, it was their behavior. And if we could get these selective feeders working in groups, they could actually be doing mulching, fertilizing, and pruning function that all herding herbivores have. And we found that in areas where the cattle couldn't readily go, especially steep hills, rocky hill slopes, donkeys went quite readily. So without much input, we were able to have them working in these areas where the cattle wouldn't readily go, and then by just occasionally putting a salt lick somewhere, that would attract them to an area we could manipulate their location through placing salt licks, and we've been manipulated their behavior by simulating the predator. So it's the predator-prey relationship that gets the prey animal to function correctly in its environment, and in this case, bunching up. So, but we didn't want the donkeys to associate us with a predator. So I'd be predating without their knowledge. So I'd be like a sniper. I'd just take out one or two males, or single animals that were out on their own, and then the fact that they were being predated on must have caused some sort of an unease, and the breeding groups ended up getting bigger and moving around in more tighter constellations, and that allowed the mulching, which we'd achieved with the cattle through herding and electric fencing. The donkeys started doing that in the areas where it wasn't feasible to have fences. So we're still very early in the piece doing this. In the meantime, what's actually happened is legislation has changed, and what we're doing is politically questionable, but I'm in the fortunate position. I've got my son who's making sure that numbers don't get out of control and there's no egress. And we're continuing to learn and watch the behavior. We're encouraging scientists to come and study and see whether our observations are correct or not. But one of them is the recruitment of perennial grasses. So the donkey, being a severe grazer, he'll take grass down and as Alejandro mentioned before, they'll take pretty senescent stuff even and crop it reasonably close to the ground. So severe pruning. And after the severe pruning, you end up with little salads growing. And before the donkey can come back and overgraze those salads, we found the marsupials come and they take the salads away. So the donkey hasn't got his salads. So, well, then he does another severe pruning of other senescent stuff. So we're finding the species interaction between the native nibblers, the marsupials, and the new imported megafauna, in this case, the donkeys. We're achieving better ground cover. Better ground cover allows the raindrops to shatter, allows water to infiltrate the ground, and slows down the ground cover, also slows down the evaporation. So in that sense, the donkeys are a major contributor to to us managing what drops out of the sky, and they complement the work that the cattle are doing in the flatter landscapes.
Hey, I have a question. So, Alejandro, you said that you prefer donkeys on your landscape to cows. Are you in a rugged landscape like Chris? Is it a similar thing with the agave plants?
Yeah, no work like in a different context, but I think what is similar in our places is that I do have a mountain range in the middle of the ranch, which is about third of the ranch, very broken land. So if we really want to fix the water cycle, we need to graze from the top down. We need to graze every piece because that's where the rain start running from the top. So when we place our cattle on that mountain range, you can see that the cattle can go up to certain height, and then the donkeys are always on top of the cattle. So yeah, the donkeys are really helping us to graze the whole area because they're really better equipped to work on broken land.
And then you also said something interesting that I heard earlier that donkeys could live on less sustainable items, right? So do you find that donkeys don't just eat the perennial grasses, they eat other stuff also?
Yeah, donkeys have really quite a diverse diet, but within that spectrum of diet, they can eat very low quality forage. They actually need to eat low quality forage. I mean, versus a cow or sheep that is more going through the leaves and more high quality stuff. But at the end of the day, the way we find a lot of land, including where you are, like in Nevada, is that
Yeah.
we find a lot of oxidized grass. So we try to like play in three colors, the grasses, the green, the gold, and the gray. So we're striving to have ranches that are on the green and the gold. Unfortunately, in a lot of parts in the western US, all what you're seeing is just the gray color. And cows and sheep will die by eating that stuff.
It's like eating cardboard.
Yeah, pretty much. All the grasses are like lost the nutritional value, and donkeys can actually do well on that. So if you're going to start regenerating a land that is so degraded, my recommendation is okay. Let's start with the donkeys. I mean, you can add later on cows, but it's going to be very costly to try to start with cows. And unfortunately, most of the cows that we have nowadays are not adapted. They're very spoiled. And to my knowledge, in many parts of the world, really nobody's spoiled a donkey.
And in support of what Alejandro is saying, my observation was when we first arrived and we had the feral donkeys, feral cattle, in the wet season, everything was nice and fat. And as soon as things started drying out, the cattle started losing condition very rapidly, whereas the donkeys maintained their condition all year round, and they still do. So we've got animals that are locally adapted and seem to match all their nutritional requirements. So why not work with nature if that's what nature is selected for? That's our thinking.
Now, Jason, are the donkeys' diets different from wild mustangs, or are they similar? Do wild mustangs need a different grass?
I think the donkeys will eat. I mean, you have wild mustangs. Well, not mustangs, but you have wild horses, right, Chris, in Australia?
We do, but
you find their behavior similar or different than the donkeys?
I haven't got the authority to comment on that much because we don't have wild horses where we are, because we have a native legume that's toxic to horses. So my inclination is to say that the donkeys are more of a semi-desert animal than the horse. The horse would be sort of more savanna tending.
I mean, that answers the question for me. Obviously, the donkeys can survive and the horses can't.
Yeah, no, that makes
Correct.
sense. So I don't know if you know a little bit about Nevada. One of our big feral species that's very invasive on our landscape is the mustangs. Like they're
Yep.
out of control, and but it sounds like the donkeys are less picky, and it sounds like they're more friendly on the landscape. Am I correct on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think the behavior of horses and donkeys needs to be studied more. But there is new research that's coming out that's suggesting what Chris brought up, that this predator-prey relationship, horses and donkeys don't have any natural predators. And so they need a human to come in and manage that behavior.
Yeah. So the word that Ron used was control. Yes. When predator-prey relationships were intact, there was this self-controlling process in the landscape, that's been severed through human interventions and lack of predators, and that's where, whether it's donkeys or mustangs, horses, whatever, or cattle, we still need some sort of control. So in our case, I've got my son in a helicopter he'll make sure the numbers don't become excessive, and the way to do that is just stop egress. Anything that egresses, it gets shot, and so we maintain control that way. And internal predation is, in the meantime, we have some native predators. The dingoes have started to work as packs, so there's a bit of predation there. But it's still early days for us. We've taken these feral donkeys. We're rewilding them. We're not trying to domesticate them, which is why I'm really enjoying to compare notes with Alejandro, who's actually using domesticated donkeys and working in with his herd. We're both working towards the same thing, and that's rehydrating the landscape primarily, and then working out, once we've got production, how do we do that. But it's early days, but it's very exciting, and definitely the predator-prey relationships, whether you do it through hunting or introducing a local predator, or just allowing the local predator to do what he does by not poisoning him, or domesticating him and using electric fences or herding. It's the dynamics, the herding dynamics, and that behavior of these large herbivores is what we need in the landscape. And the industry, historically, we've been just harvesting meat to feed people, whereas now we're saying, well, why don't we use these animals that have cooperated with humans for millennia for either transport reasons or meat reasons? Let's see if we can use their energy to function as landscape engineers, as their wild ancestors would have been way back when.
Yeah,
and I think also the difference for what Chris has been working on is he's been using these wild donkeys to rehydrate the land, but he's been asked to cull the entire herd. And if he culls the entire herd, then he won't have the donkeys that helped him rehydrate the land in the first place.
It's interesting, like when it comes to management and thinking about it, like we have we're all the way on the other side of the world from you, but we have a similar problem here in a small town where me and Jason do a lot of water development for native ungulate species. We have up by Beatty, there's donkeys all over the place, right, Jason? They're walking through town,
and it's greener.
You could feed them in the gas station with apples, like they come to the gas pumps. But at the same time, like, I just don't think they're managed right. So maybe if they're managed better and placed better, more strategically, like used as like an actual labor animal, then it sounds like it's a chessboard. Am I correct on that? If you have too many pawns, you're not going to get what you need.
One of the things that I think is possible is I think we can rehydrate the land around Nevada. And as we do that, we could put more water into the river system that leads into Lake Mead. And Lake Mead we might be able to raise the waters of Lake Mead, which would not only benefit Nevada, but Arizona and possibly even Mexico. So I know I have some really crazy wild ideas, but these guys have done it. Chris has rehydrated his land. You can show a picture of his property.
Yeah, let's pull up some of those. Which one do you want to show?
Let's show the first picture of Chris's property. That's them with their donkeys.
Let me go to the main display and throw it up here.
But the next picture is Chris's property, I think, at Kachana Station. And, those are the donkeys. That's the water he's been able to get on the land. And then the next set of pictures that you're going to show is the kind of before and after when he got there. So in 1992, that's what it looked like when he got there. In 2010, you see all that green. And then now we're 2015, we're in 2025. I don't have a picture for 2025, but I imagine it's even greener than what it was before.
So, the concept is a lot of people think that the more plants you have, the more water they consume. Is that a wrong concept?
It's in our case, the water's there because of the grass, or more grass, and the grass is there because of the change behavior of the animals. So we've got more mouths and more hooves. What they do is they press to the ground living and dead vegetation apart from feeding themselves. And that ground cover then shatters raindrops and allows water to percolate into the soil. Now, I don't know about Nevada, but certainly where we are, there are two major water thieves. One is gravity. That's water that just flows away because of the slopes. And the next biggest thief is water that's gone into the soil or into the ground, and because the ground is bare, the top dries out, and then the water gets sucked up through the sand and evaporates, and it's soil surface evaporation or evaporation off bare ground is by far the next biggest thief of water, and is a huge thief of water. And by creating ground cover, we can slow down the gravity thief, and we can slow down the evaporation thief. So we end up hanging to a little bit more water a little longer each year, and that allows plant growth to keep going longer. And then the animals, through our grazing regimes, we keep those plants in an active vegetative phase for as much as possible. And actively growing green plants are pulling in sunshine energy, a lot of which they release underground to feed the microorganisms and build soils. Mm-hmm. So just by the way we manage our large herbivores, we can influence soil building and rainfall management, and that's pretty exciting in a world where water is becoming scarce in certain areas, and when you can reclaim landscapes that conventional wisdom has abandoned.
Chris, what would you say to someone that says that fire is an important part of that landscape, and that we're disrupting the cycle by rehydrating the land?
Say again, by dehydrating the land?
Well, I mean, I heard an argument that rehydrating the land is not what we want. We want it to be desertified. We want the deserts. We need the deserts. And I know that you use fire to manage your property as well, but I think when I was looking at your property, when you rehydrate the land, even though you have fire, that fire goes out. And because the land has more water in it, so you're using both fire and the rehydration of your land to manage kind of your whole ranch there.
We look at fire as a tool. It's just like a chainsaw or a bulldozer, depending who the operator is, what size tool it is, how sharp it is, how much fuel you've got, how long you apply it, you can get different results. So it's more our management is directed at rehydrating landscape and building productivity. Who and how actually the job gets done will depend from season and depends on the context and what opportunities arise. But in general, the broad brush statement that I'll make is replacing herbivores with fire is a bad idea in a seasonally dry landscape, because it tends to expose soil, and then when it does rain, you end up washing a lot away, and also you've got months of radiation and heat, and so we're really killing life by pulling the skin off through fire. So fire just takes the skin off the soil surface, and we end up with dehydration. And just like with our own bodies, if we have a severe burn, it's the dehydration that kills us. If we survive that, it's the infection that'll kill us. It's not the fire that actually does the damage. It's what the fire does that then leads to the ongoing chain reactions and self-destructive cycles. And if we have a series of bad management decisions, it doesn't take long to turn large areas of land into desert. And when you don't have humidity throughout the year, they don't self-regenerate. And that's where human management, using the large herbivores as nature's gardeners to properly graze, but also on a daily basis bring nutrients back out into the landscape in the form of dung and urine onto mulch. Yeah, we're trying to kickstart processes that nature had evolved over aeons and had maintained over aeons, and that had built the productivity that's sustained human civilizations. And now, we realize these processes are still around. What can we do with what is here to sort of reactivate these processes and learn as we go? So there's a lot of learning still to do, and it's always important that we have critical questioning and revisit, because what worked this year may not work next year, and what works here may not work over there. So there's no recipes there either.
Yeah, hey, Chris, it sounded like you had something you wanted to say earlier when we were talking. We cut you off.
Well, this is Alejandro, but
Oh,
I want
Alejandro,
to
I'm
share.
sorry. Golly. Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, I just want to share with you a story where I was in India and we're always promoting this kind of management. And I met this German delegation. And when I tried to talk to them about livestock, they say, no, no, no. It takes too many liters to produce 1 kilo of beef. And then I say, well, let me give a presentation. So my point to them was that on bare ground in the Chihuahuan Desert, where I am, we did an infiltration test, and it takes 2 inches per hour. Once we apply the management with livestock, meaning cattle and donkeys, the same infiltration test, now that we grew grass, we can actually capture 18 inches of rain per hour. I mean, we don't even get the 18 inches. Uh, but my point is that if you extrapolate that difference to our 30,000 acre ranch, we could meet the water needs for 100,000 people for a full year.
Wow.
And that's just from stopping the evaporation and what was the other cause of loss?
Yeah,
Gravity.
gravity, and also say you pretty much you're increasing the what Alan Severy called the effective rainfall. Meaning, don't tell me how much rain you get, tell me how much rain you can keep.
What an interesting concept. Don't tell me how much rain you could get. Tell me how much rain you could keep.
Yeah, because there's a study in Colorado that they're only capturing. Remember that in Colorado they were having issues, not having water on the Colorado River, and they only capturing. The study said that they were only capturing only like 40% of the rain. Think about that. We were wasting at least 60% of the rain that we get,
At least.
at least.
Yeah, and like me thinking about it right now is like we just had a big rainfall like last
Huge.
month, right?
Yeah,
And what
huge.
did you see on the side of the road for days?
Oh my God,
Yeah.
yeah, you don't
Puddles
want to
of
see that.
water that did not go away. And so like it's like clicking in my head now that like we lost all that water because of evaporation, right? It doesn't go back into the groundwater table, right, Jason?
No, it just runs up. Well,
It's just wasted.
Nevada's a little bit interesting because we do capture what hits a gutter. So, but there
I'm
are
talking
still
about the middle of
puddles.
the
There's still
desert.
puddles, and there's puddles in the desert. Like I'm out with my dog in the desert almost every day, and all that water just evaporating out. It's not penetrating the ground.
Yeah.
Yes.
So not only are we not using that water, which we could have been using, in some cases that water collects in rivers and causes damage downstream, and we're rebuilding bridges and having to
Levies.
fix roads, or fields get flooded. So there's actually an active damage cost of that wasted water as well. So it's like a it's like a scissors effect.
Do you want to tell them about flash floods in Nevada?
I'm
Oh,
Yeah.
sure.
there you
I'm
go. There,
sure
yeah.
Chris
That's
has
right.
experienced the flash floods. Probably Alejandro as well. I'm sure we
Oh
all
no.
know what the flash floods are.
Yes.
I think. Do
Yeah.
we have that picture up on the
No, I
screen
don't.
for
I can
everyone?
switch. Which one do you want?
So
Yeah.
let's do Alejandro's ranch and show the picture of what the field looked like, and then what it looks like now with the grasses. So I mean, it's just amazing to see what management has done on your properties, and you're both managing in a little bit different. But can you explain, what does responsible donkey management look for the domestic donkeys versus the feral donkeys, and is there a difference?
Yeah. Well, in our particular case, we're running together cattle and donkeys. They're on the same herd, and when we think about water, yes, it's critical, but the most critical aspect for us to have more grass productivity or growing more grass is air in the soil, because it's compaction in the soil, and that means that you don't have the microbiology, or we call it microherd, that is causing the water not to infiltrate, to run off, to evaporate. So when you apply good grazing practices using, let's say, cattle or donkeys, you're actually promoting more plants, more diversity, healthier grasses with deeper roots. And that way, when you feed also that microherd through photosynthesis, they're gonna start creating that air in the soil, those porous soil, which will improve the effective rainfall.
And in tow, behind the donkeys and the cattle, whether in Alejandro's situation or our situation, you've got the dung beetles that also they'll drill into hard ground. There's a bit of moisture in the dung. They'll use that and they'll drill down into hard ground, creating tunnels for air and water to go down. So there's a whole lot of flow-on effects from having the herbivores behaving in the right manner, and you can manage that behavior in a very targeted way in specific areas. So grazing, as with fire as well, they can be blunt tools or they can be precision instruments, and we're trying to work on the precision instrument side of it. And Alejandro with domesticated donkeys, and I'm trying to get instinctive wild behavior functioning again.
So how do you plan those rotations and rest periods for the donkeys? Or for the land, I mean. How do you plan the rotations of the donkeys through the land?
Right. I can't manage the donkeys like I can manage the cattle, but by taking the cattle into an area, and then I call it party crashing. I'll party crash an area with a herd of cattle, and the donkeys that were there will then have to go somewhere else. And then after that, by treating an area one way, all of a sudden it becomes attractive for another species to follow in a few weeks later. So by combination of how I move my animals and the cattle when and where, and how I strategically move lick blocks, I can get the donkeys to do some good work and get them to work where I'd like them to work. But I'm nowhere near the level of sophistication that Alejandro was talking about before, so that we've got wild donkeys working independently of my managed redomesticated cattle. But as I said, it's early days yet. There's a lot of new experimenting I'd like to do, but we're getting the results, and that's at the end of the day, that's what counts. Once our landscapes start rehydrating, the productivity increases and the soils start building, and then we have a resource we can discuss. We can indulge in the academic debate of what we want to do there. But while we're losing the resources and the country's dehydrating, we've got nothing to discuss. So the first step is just stop the hemorrhaging, start getting healing and revitalization going, and then start learning. And this is where, it's great when Alejandro and I can get the chance to sit down. We come from different continents, different contexts, different challenges, but at the end of the day, hydration principles and how we get sunshine to come back into the equation and build biodiversity, those principles appear to be pretty universal. So we compare notes and see if we can steal ideas of each other and maybe hybridize ideas. So it's all pretty exciting.
Donkeys is our common ground.
That's what people want to punish us for.
Are there any other tools you're using, like GPS collars, satellite monitoring, soil tests, to help you track and manage that the donkey impact?
I think that would come down the track, and I think that's more the role for the researchers to do, because I think as pioneering these new ideas, we need to stay innovative and responsive to whatever information we get, and we'll run with what seems to work. And then the role of science is to question that and put it to the test. And
and I'm not sure you're aware, folks, but in Kenya there's a study done in Kenya because the pastoralists were complaining about zebras taking grass from their herds, cattle. And there were these folks from the US going there. They were not allowed to use zebras because they're not allowed to do that in Kenya, but they use donkeys. So there was a control group of only cattle and another group of donkeys and cattle. And cattle did better running together with donkeys in terms of, let's say, daily gains and pregnancy rates and things like that. So that's why we call our donkeys the cover crops or service crops.
Yeah. And we call our donkeys the fire officers.
Aren't the donkeys also protective over your herds too, Alejandro? Like, I know they're a lot more mean than a cow for the most part. Am I wrong on that, or is that a myth I heard?
No, you're right. They are more alert to predation, For example, in our particular case, we have predation from mountain lions and coyotes. And yeah, they've been helping. They've been helping. It was not the main purpose. The main purpose was how can I take most of the plants here and convert them into something more useful for the like manure and things like that. And but I think that they've been helping. Yep.
What we're
So,
finding when we sort of
go ahead.
what we're finding when we start applying biomimicry principles, which is we're trying to mimic nature, do what how nature works. All of a sudden, nature starts teaching us. So not only are we mimicking nature, we become students of nature, and it's amazing what you can teach us. And then we think we've learned something, and we try something, and then nature will then select and tell us very quickly whether we're on the right path or not. So it's quite fascinating. So there's quite a few things. Well. Probably with Alejandro as well, but things that I started doing for other reasons that I'm now doing for new reasons because nature showed me the advantages.
So you bring up nature, and Alejandro, can you speak a little bit to what happened to nature on your farm as far as other species that moved in that weren't there before you had the donkeys and the other herbivores grazing?
Yeah. We've been working with some organizations in the U.S. protecting birds, migratory birds coming, let's say, from Montana, Dakotas, all the way to the Chihuahua Desert to overwinter, and they have seen a dramatic increase thanks to the management we have, grazing management on those. Actually, our ranch has the largest population of endangered unlisted migratory birds than any other ranch south of the border. And we know now more, we have more certainty about that to say because we have a tracking station. So it tracks all the birds with devices. Only we have had a dramatic increase on all the wildlife, mule deer, and um, even desert turtles. I mean, it's just amazing. Like we have thousands and thousands of those thanks to the covering the soil with grasses. And yeah, it's just so beautiful because you're promoting life in all its shapes and forms.
And yeah, and the scientists will use a lot of that high-tech stuff, the tracking stuff. So yeah, we will certainly welcome that research, and high-tech does play a role there. But for myself, I think I want to learn a lot more about what's going on before I start relying on technology to do my work for me.
Well, Chris, your ranch is impressive, and the water that's on your ranch is impressive. And how long did it take to get to the point that you are now? Like, when did you first seeing that water start showing up?
Well, thank you for the compliment there. Unfortunately, that impressiveness is restricted to a small area, but there's still a lot of areas where I'm not at all impressed by what I've achieved. But in the areas, in our model areas where we're putting things to the test, or I call them a QA plots or pilot projects, it took me 3 years in one instance to get a perennially dry, a seasonal creek to become a perennially flowing creek, and that now supplies our main water supply for our camp. And we've also got springs popping up on the side of the hills where I didn't think there'd ever be a spring. Areas where when I first arrived, we'd drive through with a tractor. Now you'd get bogged. You wouldn't even think of driving through there. So depending on your context and rainfall and whatever, you can get some very spectacular results within a very short time frame. But
And the reason why
it depends on
that area is that because you're not allowed to have the donkeys in other places. Why is it restricted to that small part of your ranch?
because I can't afford to do more. When I first started, I was a bit ambitious and I was working on 30 square kilometers. And then we ended up creating our own fire nightmare. We started, you saw how bare it was when we started, and then we ended up growing feed faster than we could grow the herd or trample the stuff into the ground. So I decided, let's just focus on small areas, understand the principles, and then we can scale up at a later stage. Because if you focus on methodologies where biology does the work, all the heavy lifting, from the microbes to the plants to the animals, well, then you're scale neutral. So what I'm doing with 60 to 80 head on a a few hectares or a few hundred hectares, you could easily do with a few thousand cattle on a few thousand hectares. So it's very easy to upscale, but it needs to be uh, condoned at political and at a local as well as a regulatory level. We do need the support, and while the common thinking is that new Australian species are a pest, well then it's not financially very wise to sort of upscale too quickly. So yeah, we've just restrict our work to model areas where we can have tight management on everything, and with the donkeys, given it's a controversial issue here in Western Australia, we keep those donkeys under control and make sure they don't escape. So doing it on a whole of property scale is it's not politically and it's not financially feasible for us at this stage. But the science is still coming in. There's science coming in from Africa, as Alejandro alluded to, and his work over in Mexico. And yeah, let the science prevail, and let's learn and then find out whether the regulation needs to sort of adapt, and we start encouraging these sort of practices to be tested more.
Can I ask a specification question? So you said that you keep the donkeys that you're using for your project on your property, right? Is there a fence that they can't get through? Is that correct?
No, there is no fence. We have
Okay.
formidable natural barriers,
Okay.
and there's an area where they could, if the populations got too big, they'd naturally spill out further along the valley. We intentionally keep low stocking rates there. So any spillage out of the area or egress out of the area, we'd immediately pick up, and then we do something about that. So
So
it's
I
a
guess
carrot and
why would
stick
they care?
approach.
Why does the Australian government care what you do with your land?
Oh, it's not our land. We have a pastoral lease.
Oh,
A lot of the Northern Australian leases are that huge that you can't own them outright, but you have a grazing lease or a pastoral lease
sure.
on that land, and for all intents and purposes, you can do just about anything you can as if it's freehold. But there's certain legislation that is universal. It's just like you're not allowed to just take your bulldozer and drive through the fence into next door, and that's what they're worried about. Um, in this case, they're worried about the donkeys going next door or causing damage, and we're saying, well, why don't we throw a bit of science at this and have a look at what's actually happening, and we will find that we are containing the donkeys exactly where they're meant to be, and in fact, counter to conventional thinking, they're contributing to better landscape outcomes and aren't a pest. So yeah, it's early days, and we're still working at things, and there's research is happening, and we shall see.
Well, it makes sense that the donkeys don't want to leave your land if it has the most food on it, right? It seems like they stay by the food source, so
Well, it's
it seems like a
food
lot of
and
government oversight.
safety. Whereas, you know, it's if they leave, well, they get killed, and then they learn pretty quick. They're not. I can safely say the donkeys are smarter than the cattle and the horses that I've come across in my lifetime.
Mhm. They are.
Yeah.
So, Alejandro, what role do you think fences have played in kind of rehydrating land? Do fences cause problems, or should they be taken down? Should we put them up? Are they good for containing the animals? What role would fences play?
I think one of the original roles, there were no fences when the Spaniards came there, and for many years there were no fences. Very few fences. The original fences were like a stone fences, and cowboys there were pretty good at placing cattle. So the degradation really did not take place at that time. I feel that the degradation of land started taking place when we start putting the first barbed wire fence, because it was very easy for ranchers saying, "Oh, just let the cows stay there," but then you start getting overgrazing certain plants, overwasting others, so the degradation start. But now we're using actually electric fence to trying to mimic the bison migrations, like creating that mob, that herd effect. and then resting the place that you just grazed. That is as important as grazing the place. And right now we have learned that in our context, uh, we have, let's say we have 350 permanent electric fence paddocks or pastures, but they can go to thousands of them if it rains, if we have a good rainy season. But then we provide a very long rest period, so all the plants just recover. I was telling you guys that we've been working with the bird conservancy organizations, and they sometimes, when they do the transects, they sometimes take like a person specializing on grasses. So we've been able to go from 20 grasses in 8 years to 80 grasses. And for us, one of the name of the games is diversity. The more diverse you can grow in your plants, the more resilient your ranch is going to be. So we're pretty much mimicking nature using electric fence in our ranch.
So once again, it's like a tool. It's like with fire. It depends on what you're trying to achieve. You'll use that tool differently. Like I can use a hammer to pull in a nail. I can use a hammer to drive in a nail. I can use it to bend over the nail. I can use it to break something. And as we start exploring these new tools, we come up with new things that we can do with them.
So how do you communicate these benefits and results to your skeptical neighbors?
I don't try. I'm hoping that we can arouse their curiosity and they ask us why. It's we have a saying here: you can lead a horse to water, but you cannot make him drink. And my job is not to try and make horses drink. My job is to show thirsty horses how to make their own water.
Yeah, and in our case, in the Chihuahuan Desert, I have 4 neighbors, and yeah, I mean, you cannot convince anyone; they have to convince themselves. But they start looking over the fence, and oh, you're getting a lot of grass. Probably you got more rain,
Yeah,
and so
a bit
on,
more
or
land.
it only rains on the other side of the fence. So I never say anything to them. I just listen. Now, two of my neighbors are on board, so that's really very beneficial because then we're creating a bigger, more resilient microclimate or piece of land. Yep. But it took them like 10 years to think about doing something.
So Alejandro, do you have any troubles with policymakers in Mexico as far as managing your lands like Chris has, or is it you pretty much free to do what you need to do?
No, we're pretty much free to do which has like a two edges, right? Because people means managing the land, they don't have any kind of overseeing. But yeah, we're pretty much free to do what we want because it's all the land is deeded private, and yeah, we have no issues with that.
I think
Chris, what?
without.
Oh, go ahead.
Sorry.
Sorry, go ahead, Chris. Sorry.
I was just going to say it's not really the issue. I don't really have issues with the policy makers as such. It's more our policymakers have got such a huge area to police, and they, in their own self-interest, they're trying to make it simple and come up with one-size-fits-all solutions, which
Yeah.
in an industrial setting is appropriate, but in living ecological scenarios, no two paddocks are the same, let alone two ranches or something, an area that's getting close to 2 meters of rainfall compared to an area that only gets half a meter. So it's the tyranny of distance that doesn't allow our policymakers to actually get out onto the ground and to get first-hand information about how these policies actually pan out in other parts of the state. So
Chris,
it's more of encouraging dialogue and communication, and well, we're working on that.
yeah, so what kinds of policy shifts and public narratives do we need to change when it's surrounding this conversation about feral donkeys?
If I knew the answer, we wouldn't be sitting here. But my suspicion is that just as at the ripe old age of 40, I had to go back to school because of all the new things that I had to start learning about how nature works out here in the landscape. I think our policymakers and regulators also need to be learning with us together. So while I understand that regulation and policy has to be top down, it does need to align with how things function bottom up, and our job is bottom up, and nature builds bottom up. So we need good communication. We need to be learning together and working together as a team rather than sort of creating polarization, which is so common these days.
Yeah, and we understand that a lot of, even in the US, a lot of policies that have been applied to the land, including public land, is based on set stocking, continuous grazing, which is not beneficial to the land. But the kind of grazing that we practice is regenerating and hydrating the land. So I think policies need to be upgraded for those people who practice this kind of management.
But that means the policymakers need to be upskilled as well.
Exactly.
They need to learn with us.
Yes.
Hey,
Education.
Chris, when did you start having problems? How many years back did you start having problems with them going after the donkeys on your landscape?
Well, I didn't have problems. In '97, there was new legislation that put me on the wrong side of a politically correct fence. And we were working at that stage. I didn't quite realize how important the donkeys were, but but we'd done a major destock because, in line with conventional wisdom, we actually believed that we had too many animals, or we accepted that might be the case. So we did a major destock in '96, and within 3 years, we realized that the wildfires that ensued as a direct result of the destocking were creating far more damage than the feral animals ever did. And that's when we started to attempt to get a dialogue happening between the policymakers 3,000 kilometers away from us, or 2,500 kilometers away from us, saying, hey, we need to look at this. What I'm seeing is flying in the face of conventional wisdom. And then we started experimenting with the blessing of the local department people at the grassroots level. There was very good cooperation, and it was only, and I'm not clear on the dates here, I think it was 2014 and then again 2017 when all of a sudden, unbeknown to me, policies changes happened or legislation amendments happened, and all of a sudden the donkeys that had been here long before we arrived, and we've been here before anybody who's alive today, and had acclimatized, all of a sudden were put into the pest category. And by that time, we were already using these animals, and we said, well, let's have an informed discussion. Let's find out. But that's when, for some reason we haven't achieved in getting a good dialogue yet. It's been became very confrontational as of 2018.
You haven't been able to have that dialogue where you're like, hey, listen, it's reducing fuel load. I'm conserving water, which you want, and it's better for the landscape in a whole. It's the best green thing we could do, and they're just like, no, we don't want to hear it. Is that
I think Chris operates in a little bit of a different, we can't really compare him to the United States or Mexico. He's got like this, what do they call it, constitutional monarchy. So they still have Great Britain, but they have independent states that operate very uniquely. And the structure of their government, I'm just starting to learn about it, but it's very different than anything that any of us has to deal with, where we're surrounded by federal land in Nevada. And, we have people that graze on that land. And, we've had some people who are at odds with our government as well because of their grazing on the land.
We've got some friends for here, Chris. You ever want to come down? The Bundys would love you.
So I think you see that clash between government and, in our case, ranching as well. Mm-hmm. But in Chris's case, I think there are some people that could come out and help him because he has that constitutional monarchy. I mean, King Charles actually has the ability to come down and make some changes for him.
Yeah, and it seems like with the whole green initiative, right, that everybody's pushing nowadays, and global warming and conserving water, it seems like you're at the forefront of it. You're like, hey, it's a simple solution, and we just need to get out of our own ways.
Yeah, I mean, I can fully understand the predicament of the average bureaucrat, because you're part of a system. You get paid to do a job. If you get it wrong, you'll get a slap on the fingers. If you do a very good job, no one's going to know about it.
Mm-hmm.
So it is frustrating to then go out on a limb and maybe allow something that defies the regulation is not a safe thing to do. So the safest thing to do is just to stick with your regulation. But
Yes.
in an environment that's changing, you have to adapt. Well, that's how evolution works. You adapt or die.
Yeah.
And I, for the sake of my grandchildren, I'd rather we adapt than die. So
Well, it seems
let's
to me
just
like there
hope we
should
can
be
get
some benefits
communication
under-
improving. Sorry, that.
It seems to me there should be some benefits for what you've done. I mean, you've really helped the land out. I mean, it seems like a good benefit might be that maybe your lease is less, or maybe doesn't even exist. I mean, you've been doing things to the land that nobody else around you's been doing, and it's obvious that it's working. It's obvious you're having a positive impact in the environment, and it seems to me like that might be some policy changes that could be put in place to help you out. Is that when you're putting these regenerative agriculture practices in place and you are rehydrating land, that maybe your pastoral lease isn't as much.
Well, maybe, but I think that would be a lovely benefit for those people who then come after us. But I think if at the cutting edge where Alejandro and I are, where we're pioneering new ideas, I think just having the safety of being able to go out there, try new things, and make a mistake with nature punishing us if we make a mistake, but not the bureaucracy punishing us because we might make a mistake. We need, if we want innovation, innovators need to be able to innovate. You can't put them in straitjacket and describe the exact innovation that they're supposed to be doing. It just doesn't work that way. And the predicament that I see ourselves in is I'll bring an analogy here. Stephen Covey, one of your countrymen, human resource management guru, he says you can't talk your way out of a relationship where or out of a predicament that you've acted yourself into. And I'm saying at the ecological level, we can't legislate our way out of a predicament that we've managed our way into. We've actually got to manage our way back out of it. And that's where the innovators, the managers of the land, the custodians have to have community and regulatory support to do the type of innovation that will take us back to somewhere, something that's beneficial for those after us. And it's got to become safe to make mistakes, because only we learn through mistakes. And that means, and it's not safe for a bureaucrat to make a mistake, because that's the system won't allow that. Mm-hmm. So this is where I fully understand the predicament that our regulators are in, and the bureaucrats who sort of meant to be policing that. We need to just stand back and say, it's like this is a time of crisis, a time of war. We are, it's an exceptional situation. We need to create exceptional conditions, whether they're ministerial injunctions or the king says, hey, give them a chance, whatever. I don't care. We need to be realistic and practical about the fact that we need new solutions, because more of the same is proving to be a disaster. And you just read the newspapers about the increases of flash floodings every year and the costs of flood repair and band-aid measures. So, the financial penalties of not having responded to what nature's been signaling to us for over 50 years is now beginning to cripple local economies. So, yeah, at some stage, things will change. The question is just how much damage do we need before it happens?
Chris, I absolutely love the quote. I'm going to use it. We need to be allowed to make mistakes. Like, that is a beautiful thing to say. And we wholeheartedly believe that at WHIN. Wildlife Habitat Improvement in Nevada.
It's a win for WHIN.
It's a win for WHIN, yeah. Like, we're not limited by bureaucracy with our club. We have a big fundraiser, right? And then we could use those funds to do what we want. And we're doing things that we're not sure if we're going to work. Like, we have these floating habitat islands that are in the middle of lakes that no one else is using in southern Nevada, or no other management area or anywhere in the United States is using. And it's working wonderfully, but it could be a huge mistake, We're populating what is it? Winter kochia, snowstorm kochia. That hasn't been done a lot, but it's a mistake. But, like, you're not going to improve if you're not willing to make the mistakes. And you're absolutely correct. I don't think bureaucrats want to make mistakes. they'd rather.
Well, they get penalised. They get penalised.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That, mhm.
No, yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and clip that last segment you said and put it on the Joe Rogan podcast. So, hey, have you watching there's guys like you on his podcast, like Will Harris and White Oak Pastures, that are doing regenerative agriculture like you guys. Have you
Yeah,
met
well,
up or collaborated with any of those guys?
I haven't met Will Harris. I've been watching him with great interest. I have had the privilege of meeting Joel Salatin in 26 years ago when he came to Australia once. And yeah, no, there's definitely changes in the air. People are beginning to ask new and better questions because unfortunately we seem to have got very good at answering the wrong questions. But yeah, no, I think there's change in the air, and let's hope we can add a bit of fuel to that change.
So, Alejandro, if you had one message for land managers or conservationists that are struggling with degraded landscapes, what would it be?
Well, I have seen a lot of traction going on in the Western US. A lot of people getting on board, even people from the government getting on board, young people. And I think there's good examples right now. Um, they can see the results. So, but they need to get educated, they need to get exposed, and they need to be curious about it. And yeah, it can be done. It can be done, definitely. It doesn't matter where you are, Nevada or Arizona or the driest or the wettest, but it can be done, and we can show them the results.
I think it's all about innovation, right?
Yeah, I've learned a lot. Like this podcast has been super informative to me. It makes me want to go do a lot of new things that are probably gonna ruffle some feathers in Nevada. But we'll call you when we do them and invite you to the party, I guess.
Thank you.
So, yeah, we've enjoyed having you on our first episode of Rewilding and Rehydrating with Dr. Wasden.
Yeah. Are we wrapping it up? Okay, I've got a controversial question that I'm going to edit out if you don't want to answer it. What are the uses for the harvested donkeys when you're harvesting them? And the reason why I generate this question is because in the little town I live about an hour outside of Vegas in Logandale, ag community. And back in the early 90s, we have wild feral donkeys out there. The fire department would harvest one and they barbecue it for a fundraiser. Have you guys done anything like that with the donkeys that you harvested, or do you just leave them for the predators? And if you do that, that's fine too. I was just curious.
Well, in our context in Mexico, donkeys can be sold. Many people ask me, okay, so that means that you eat donkey? And I tell them, we do. We don't know about it, but we do. So, I mean, it's one of the most nutrient dense meats. There's no reason why not to eat a donkey, right? It's part of the diet. Yep.
Okay. I could edit that out, Jason. Because you're going to use it for political discord. I just wanted to know. Have you tried, Chris?
I haven't eaten donkey meat. I've cut up donkeys for dog's meat, and but then they're generally the old donkeys, the ones that I'm culling anyway.
Yeah.
And but we don't have enough donkeys for what we're trying to do.
Yeah, so
But
in Nevada,
if we had enough donkeys, what I'd be looking at is selling guard donkeys. There's a market in the eastern states for trained guard donkeys for people to protect their, closer to towns and that, where there's a problem with wild dogs. To protect the lambs and the calves. So there's a good market for wild donkeys, for guard donkeys, and that's the pet food. And then I've heard it. Well, one of my friends who was actually helping me with the donkeys early in the piece, as acting as the predator, he was eating them, and yeah, it's just it's more a mental thing. There's no reason, as Andra said, the donkey meat is perfectly good. Not only is it perfectly good, these fellas are complementing their diet with all sorts of herbs and stuff that the cattle wouldn't be getting. So it's probably very, very healthy as well. So, and looking at the health of the donkey, well, inherently Yeah, it's. I I think I'll cross that bridge when I come to it. At the moment, donkeys and cattle, we actually have about the same amount of births and deaths because these guys are working hard all their lives,
Mm-hmm.
and we are looking at our local predators, so we don't poison our dingoes, which are the native the local native dog who's been in Australia for over 6,000 years apparently. So also new Australian according to some people, but yeah, they predate on the donkeys and the ones that we have to shoot because they've egressed or they look like they're going to leave Kachana. Well, very often it's not practical to bring them back, but I fully believe in utilizing, and nature doesn't waste anything anyway.
Yeah.
Hmm.
But
Yep.
we can certainly try and be more efficient in the recycling, or recycle or upcycle in different manners. There's all these things could be explored, and that's the thing is if it's once it becomes safe to explore new ideas, well, innovation will find a way, and
Yeah,
concepts will come.
and once we understand that donkeys could be a great solution and not a problem, then that's where ideas gonna come.
Yeah. Well, in Nevada, we've got wild horses and we've got wild donkeys, and they're protected, and you can't manage them.
No, we're not allowed to manage them. I'm sure you guys know about AMUs, right? Like the AMUs for the wild horses are out of control. Like they can't. I don't know.
Yes.
We can't keep up with them in Nevada. It's our biggest problem on our landscape for our wildlife out here. So
Hmm.
Well, it's I'm working with one scientist, and she actually asked me a very good question, which I'd never thought of, and that she says, at what point in time does an animal lose its biodiversity value? So these animals that have been domesticated and that we take for granted, they had wild ancestors out there that are part of biodiversity. And now we domesticate them, and as Alejandro is doing it and what we're doing is they are still contributing to biodiversity. There's still biodiversity there, but for some reason, bureaucratically or whatever, we've excluded them from the scenario, and us humans as well. I mean, we are part nature too. If we start bracketing, if defining nature becomes a decision made in boardrooms, well, yeah, it's a very different world, and it's one that I don't know too well. Well,
that's
I
that's
think
a whole podcast in and of itself, Chris.
let's leave that for another time, shall we?
Yeah. I'd have to sit on the outback and talk with you for hours on that one. So just okay. So well, do you want to go? Do you have any other topics you'd like to hit, Jason?
No, I think we've hit pretty much everything. Alejandro, Chris, is there anything else
Do you want to go around
say?
the room? We'll do final thoughts.
Sure.
Yeah. So we'll let Alejandro and Chris do final thoughts if you want, and then we'll wrap her up.
Yeah. I think talking now about the U.S., I think donkeys and horses, wild horses, are actually damaging a lot of land. But definitely we can use those same animals, to regenerate large tracts of land. Sometimes I tell people that if we have like something like magic saying, oh, well, suddenly all ranchers in the Western U.S. know how to move cattle, work with cattle, mimic nature. You know what would be the first challenge? We don't have enough cattle.
Yes.
I mean, we don't have enough cattle. If we were going to say we're going to manage all the cattle in the Western U.S. to regenerate the land, we wouldn't have enough cattle. But we have
Or donkeys.
horses, we have donkeys that they can really help us with that purpose.
Thanks.
I'd like to just point out the obvious, and that is we live in very polarizing times, and a lot of issues immediately get discussed, and from only two angles. Nature doesn't work. Diversity is the key. We need to look at different things from different angles, and some uniting. A theme could be water security. We all need to hydrate. We need hydrated landscapes to survive. So if we can just focus on something we all need and work together on that and start building trust and communicating, all of a sudden we'd find out that there are a lot of more things that we have in common, and we can focus on what we have in common rather than forever waste time on what divides us and ending up with polarized arguments. So for those interested, there's a lot of exciting times ahead. For those who like to get involved in arguments, well, there's no shortage of that either. But I certainly I encourage communication, exploration, curiosity, and understanding that as long as the sun shines, which is 12 hours in a day on average, and water drops out of the sky, which will vary depending on where you are, nature is wanting to help us to build or rebuild productivity and wealth. Well, that's a journey I invite people to sort of embrace, if not physically, then at least intellectually or financially. So yeah, we're all in the same boat there, and we have an awful lot in common. Let's focus on that. Thank you, and thank you for this opportunity to talk to some of your countrymen, and maybe some of my countrymen will listen in on this as well someday. Who knows? Maybe even my neighbours.
Well, we're glad to have you. Yeah, from my perspective, I'm interested in policy entrepreneurs. I consider both Alejandro and Chris policy entrepreneurs. I believe in what I call purposeful cooperative collaboration, and that when we collaborate with each other, that we can actually transform societies, we can transform policy, we can transform the land. And I think rehydrating the land is possible, especially here in Nevada where we need it so much.
Yeah.
Yeah, I really like you guys. I like people that are dangerous and willing to take risks, right? And willing to take risks in spite of what is good for them. And that sounds exactly what Chris is doing. And so thank you. Thank you for taking the risk. You're going to change generations through your sacrifice and through, one of the famous sayings we have out here, coming from pioneer culture, is that the pioneers get the arrows and the settlers get the land. And so it sounds a lot like you're taking the arrows. And so we appreciate you for doing that, because it's going to make a big change in the world.
Well, thank you, Ron and Jason, and let's hope we get some environmentally literate settlers to join us.
Now, why don't you give a shout out to where they can find you if they want to follow you on Instagram or YouTube, or if you have anything like that.
And we can post their videos.
We'll put the links up there, yeah.
Yeah, we have a Facebook page and a website which we're not maintaining too well, but there's a lot of information there, and yes, and there's a lot of people doing stuff. But yes, I'll supply the links. Thank you very much.
Excellent. We'll throw in the comments now. Alejandro, if they want to buy your tequila, where do they get that at?
Well, we have a website called desertgrasslands.com, and also we have a presence in Facebook and LinkedIn and Instagram. Yep. Under my name, or Las Damas Cattle Ranch.
So,
And if you're ever in our neck of the woods during our banquet, we'd love to have you.
Yeah, we'll have you anytime. You come out whenever you want. We'll take care of you.
Thank you.
Vice versa.
Yeah.
Please.
Well, thank you so much. And wrapping up the WHIN Podcast, like we always say, make conservation a lifestyle, and we'll catch you on the next one. Thanks.
Thank you, people.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.